Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Joining me, as he does very generously every week, is my dear friend Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. And we're talking about church news, current events in light of church teaching. Matthew, my friend, I wish there was news for us to talk about this week. I want to start with happy news, or at least news that uplifts us, and that is that today, as we're recording this, it is the anniversary of the birth of our late Holy Father, Pope Benedict XVI.
Yes, it is. So he was born on April 16th, 1927. So we're 1 year away, if my math is right, from the centenary of his birth, which I expect will be the occasion of great joy and celebration, and especially gratitude. As we look back now on the year since his resignation, we're starting, I think, to have a bit more of an assessment of his time, not just as Pope, but also as a great theologian, and looking back on his place in the 20th century in terms of the history of Catholic theology. He really has remained very firmly ensconced as one of the greatest minds, not just of the Catholic Church, but of all of humanity.
One of the last of the great Western thinkers, there's no doubt about it. To touch on certain lighthearted things, he was known for wanting an orange Fanta every year on his birthday, if I'm remembering correctly.
And he would drink beer from time to time on his birthday, too, as I recall.
That's right.
So he was somebody who, despite he could be very shy, very retiring, very academic, very professorial. You could see it in the shyness of him. And yet he was somebody who also knew how to enjoy himself. He understood the importance of fun and proper fun, I should say. And also somebody who had that sense of humor. It was just, I think, underappreciated that he appreciated the little things in life, such as an orange Fanta. He enjoyed Christmas cookies during the proper season for that. He loved to play the piano. He loved Mozart. He was a man of deep and abiding culture. And I think that's one of the great lessons that we can look to as well, as in an era in which there seems to have been a catastrophic loss of an understanding of what it means to be cultured, to be authentically human.
In the face of both his humanity, but also his astounding gargantuan intellect, what wisdom can modern man today and the church today glean from just looking at his life?
Well, I think there are two great things that I come back to, and you and I could speak for an entire week once again about his contributions, his thinking, his approach to life. But I think that there are two things. The first is his abiding concern for where we were in culture and the loss of faith, but especially what he, to go back to that phrase of his, the dictatorship of relativism, the rupture of the relationship between faith and reason, the abuse of reason in the advancement of agendas that are anything but reasonable. And he talked about the deep pathologies of our era. He did this especially back in 2005, at the very time of his election, that the central problem of our faith today is this relativism. And we can see in the now 21 years since his election as Pope, just how profound that was as a prophecy, but also how he, as was always the case, offered a great antidote to that. The second dimension to that is, I think, recapturing what it really means to understand what it means to be Christian. And that is to have that friendship with Christ, to bring others into that encounter with him. And I think if we can be depressed on one hand by how accurate his prophecy was in 2005 on the dictatorship of relativism, we can also be heartened, I think, by how accurate he was, as we are seeing now people searching for that intimate friendship with Christ. And we're seeing that playing out in the numbers of converts that are coming into the church. So he was right on both of those regards, as he was right about almost everything else.
And frankly, the way he astutely commented on particular religions and the global blowback from those comments during the Regensburg address proved him right more than anything.
That's right. And in those years, especially since his election, but in particular since his resignation in 2013, we have seen progress on the one hand with Islam, uh, certainly progress with Judaism. He was one of the great figures, I would argue, in that relationship with Judaism. Now, the point he was trying to make with Islam, especially his conception of reciprocity, the idea that it is unfair, unreasonable to ask that Christian minorities should not receive the same rights and privileges for the freedom of worship to live their faith openly as Muslims do in the West. And that, I think, was one of the points he was making, certainly in his interreligious dialogue. But at the same time, he understood profoundly that if we're going to have these dialogues with other religions, we need to be very clear about what we believe, what we teach. Otherwise, it's going to be either a dishonest conversation in which we are misrepresenting or refusing to proclaim who we really are,
Yeah.
or we are watering down what we believe in this false and what would be a doomed effort at dialogue, because inherently that's dishonest too. So I think he points us in the direction of understanding who we are, and that goes in many ways to the heart of why a document like Dominus Jesus was so important, so that we have that clarity in our understanding of the faith. His relationship, obviously, with Judaism was truly remarkable in the degree that the length to which he went to have that dialogue, and you can see his abiding knowledge of Judaism in his writings. I think especially of that magnificent set of books on Jesus of Nazareth.
I know the books he wrote in his free time. I don't know what free time he had. But what you've just shared about him presents a good segue for us to think about what's happening in the world in relation to the Holy Father right now. Elephant
Yeah.
in the room has to do with a particular Republican elephant, the American uh, Donald Trump, his recent, and Vance, J.D. Vance, and their recent criticisms of the Holy Father, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and of course Trump's very irresponsible post of that image of him as a potentially messianic figure. I invite your wisdom to help ground us in sanity.
Yeah, well, I think Sunday night, all of us who follow this closely were rather stunned to see this post on Truth Social, which is the primary avenue for the president in making his contributions to social media. But then also that image, the very obvious Christ-like image of himself. I was probably in a minority in the immediate response to it, that I was not overly shocked
Hmm.
at the post on True Social, and we can talk about that in a second. But I was genuinely surprised and frankly horrified at the image that he posted and subsequently took down. That image, I think, caused a lot of consternation, unhappiness, and outrage on the part of Christians, on the part of Catholics, evangelicals, and the president wisely removed it. He has subsequently put up, I think, a different type of an image, again associating himself with Christ, but not in the manner that he did with that first one. The post on Truth Social, I say that I wasn't shocked simply because everyone who has, in some fashion, a disagreement with the president and who stands at a certain level on the global stage is going to receive a broadside from President,
Hmm.
somebody who loves to do this on social media. The tenor of that post was also pretty much in keeping with the sort of sarcastic, sardonic wit that he brings to bear. The question is, what does it reveal about his perception of the Holy Father? And I think part of it is, and this is the fundamental misunderstanding, it seems to me, of viewing Pope Leo exclusively as a political figure
Yep.
and misunderstanding then the function of the Holy Father.
I'm talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. We are continuing this conversation on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson of EWTN News. Matthew, we were cut off by the break, but like you mentioned earlier, it was, and not only poignant, I'm so glad that so much of what you're saying is exactly where my mind went. Because the exercise for people like you and me, the moment things like this happen, is to not allow ourselves to spiral in astonishment, and at the same time to immediately prayerfully seek out the radical mean, the radical center where Christ is calling us to ground ourselves in his sanity. And so, like you said, perhaps the biggest problem with the United States politics right now, it's not isolated to Donald Trump, is
Hmm.
that there's an incapacity to view leadership offices outside of a myopic political framework, including the papacy.
Right. Yeah, and in some ways, it's a testament to the acidic legacy of someone like Saul Alinsky, who sees
Mhm.
everything as political. Now, you can argue that politics is a reality, and that those who hold to faith also have an obligation to engage in politics in exactly the same way that Catholics have a right and an obligation, a duty as citizens to engage in the public square. That
Mhm.
means they also have a right to be in the public square. And going back to Pope Benedict XVI, there has been a genuine effort on the part of many elements in the United States and around the world to push Christians out of that public square, to silence them in the advance of a very different kind of an agenda. Pope Leo, in his response to President Trump on his flight to Africa, to Algeria, I think framed it exactly right. That he said, he's not going to enter into a debate with the president. So, as we have seen, there has not been sort of a back and forth day after day of him responding and then Trump responding. Trump continues to tweet or to post his attacks on the Holy Father. The Holy Father has not really, in that sense, been reciprocating. But the other point that he makes is, and this is why he's not entering or wants to enter a debate, he said, I'm not a politician. I am here, he said, to proclaim the gospel. And sometimes that means that that is going to create disagreements, very strong ones, with policies that are undertaken, that are launched or undertaken by different governments around the world. And the Holy Father feels very strongly that he needed and needs to speak out, to do everything he can to bring about some sort of a peaceful settlement, not just of the Iran situation, but of the multiple conflicts that we find around the world.
The Perhaps the most alarming thing about what has happened in this blowout is that all Pope Leo is doing is being the Holy Father. Nothing he's done. Sure, he's taking a particularly pacifist approach when he talks about conflict, and that's prudential judgment. We can argue that, right? Some people arguing that, but even within that premise, he's well within the moral boundaries of being Holy Father.
That's right. What else can he do?
Right.
And if were he not to be speaking out, he would be criticized
Hmm.
for failing to speak out, to call for peace. It's been pointed out by a number of commentators the irony that he is being criticized for the shameful act of calling for peace. And I mean, there is a certain irony to that. And there's the dimension too that, and this is the criticism that we have seen in some areas, especially of conservative social media, including among some conservative Catholics, asking why didn't the Holy Father speak out in these terms back earlier this year when Iran was engaged in massacres of those who were protesting? Well, if we go back
Hmm.
to January, everything lives forever on the internet. The Holy Father did, in fact, call for peace and an end to the tensions and problems in Iran. And we can add in Syria, too, that he said continue to claim many lives. You can also add that there's, in some ways, a very significant difference that in calling for an end to these direct conflicts, the Holy Father is also speaking to people that he knows have a conscience. And it has to be different approach that is sometimes taken to those that we know don't. It's why the responses in many ways have been different over the years in different situations, because what is the likelihood of actually making a statement that will be listened to? And the Holy Father, like the popes, has been remarkably consistent in his appeals for peace, in an effort to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons. It was all the way back to June of last year, where he condemned the potential proliferation of nuclear weapons in the Middle East, and he has been consistent in calling for dialogue and peace. Now, we also have to note the historical reality that this is not the first time that President Trump has engaged in this type of rhetoric against a pope. Back in 2016, in the middle of the presidential campaign, Pope Francis criticized Trump's policies, proposed policies, because he was still a candidate regarding immigration. And there was a little bit of a back and forth, and Donald Trump called Pope Francis, quote, disgraceful. So again, this isn't anything that's exactly new.
That's right.
What is new is the willingness on the part of the president to ratchet up both the severity and the duration of his criticism.
the the compounding of the situation by Vance, I'd like to, and it wasn't just Vance, key leadership individuals, including the border czar of the Trump administration, effectively saying, well, just keep to your lane, Holy Father, let the church be the church.
Right.
Okay, I'd like to throw in this, Matthew, for your consideration to speak on as well. This is a man who knows the city of God, Augustine city of God. He was capable of quoting the Ordo Amoris, right? So please don't tell me that he doesn't know that commenting on politics falls well within the bounds of moral theology.
Well, precisely. And in fact, it isn't even just commenting on politics, it's commenting on what is a now mounting regional conflict. So it's twofold. It's that the question of how we apply Catholic social teaching, in particular the Catholic moral teaching, on areas such as, does this meet from a Catholic standpoint the threshold of a just war? Mm-hmm. Are you meeting the threshold, to use those technical terms, ius ad bellum? And are you meeting the threshold for ius in bello? Mm-hmm. Now we're getting into the weeds theologically, but those are very important criteria that take us back, of course, to Augustine. And as you say, that the vice president certainly knows Augustine. But then there's the moral obligation on the part of the Holy Father to speak out on these issues in which war is being waged. And we can go back many generations to the strong appeals from popes. In World War I, Benedict XV worked tirelessly to try to implement or to have supported a multi-point peace plan that could have brought an end to the war. That, of course, was in many ways stolen by Woodrow Wilson, who presented it as part of the whole Versailles peace plan and everything else. He pushed aside Benedict XV, and Wilson went on to get the Nobel Peace Prize. So we have John Paul II's very strong criticism of the plan in January of 2003 for the George W. Bush administration to go into Iraq, and did everything he could to prevent that. What is notable is that despite that very public criticism and worry, the George W. administration did not really launch the types of rhetorical counter blows at the time. They reacted as one would expect, with a certain diplomatic nuance, even in the face of the Holy Father, then Pope John Paul II, sending emissaries to try to appeal for peace. So there's nothing new in popes doing this. In fact, as you say, they have an absolute obligation to speak out under these circumstances, and that's something that any political figure should know.
My guest is Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. We're talking about church events and current events in light of church teaching, continuing on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Talking with Dr. Matthew Bunson of EWTN News, a dear friend and one of the most sane and astute minds in talking about news today. And Matthew, I thank you for the gift of your disciplined sanity because I'm fully aware that it takes a constant, deliberate practice of virtue. And so before we talk about issues proper in this segment, could you please speak to our listeners about the need to cultivate a virtuous, disciplined sanity and to stay away from algorithmic outrage that is so common today?
Right. Well, and the hot take. That's one of
The
the
hot
phrases that
take.
we all have to have a hot take. Uh, yeah, I mean, there are some great phrases that we see: the rage baiting, hot takes, instant comment. Take your pick. All of them are essentially the same thing. There, and you used a very key word there, very wisely, Marcus, and that is the way that the algorithm is designed to promote that. Social media is what it is. Whether it's on X or TikTok or Truth Social or Blue Sky, take your pick. These are environments that are designed, again, algorithmically, to provoke responses. Why? Because that's part of how the algorithm flourishes and how these platforms also flourish, make money, grow, and exercise greater media influence. So if you know that going in, it requires an almost immediate pause in your reaction to things. And AI now has added a particularly difficult layer of problem. Why? Because if you go to your typical Facebook feed, for example, and I'm just mentioning Facebook as one example of this, or
Hmm.
Instagram as another one, you will see AI generated images of quotes and pictures of, for example, there was one involving a very prominent cardinal claiming that he was defending Donald Trump against Pope Leo. Absolute fabrication. Never happened, and I won't get into any of the specifics. I don't want to encourage further that.
Hmm.
But I mean, the reality is that that pops up on a feed, and people who have those instant reactions repost and just keep disseminating what is a falsehood. We are now years and years removed even from just the peril of so-called fake news. Now this is a complete industry of that. And so what's our response? It's first to understand what is happening, to stop and assess, analyze before you respond, and analyze before you repost. If something doesn't look, if something sounds a little weird, or it doesn't sound exactly like what you'd expect, typically from a public figure, stop and double check that this is true.
Mm.
And that's true for any political figure, but it's especially true when it relates to our faith, to the Holy Father, to church leaders, and others. We owe it to them to try to understand, is this real? And if it is real, what exactly are they trying to tell us? But it has to start with us. And this, I think, is where the two great virtues of temperance and prudence have to be exercised here. Temperance, where we understand that we can't react in this way to everything that we see. Prudence allows us to form our judgments properly, which is why I believe it was called the queen of the virtues. It's a chariot rider of the virtues, of driving our understanding and our perfection of the virtues. But that it's a habit like anything else, as you know, Marcus. The virtues are habits, and we
Yep.
just have to get ourselves into that habit rather than the negative ones that can really create problems for ourselves in life.
I think that's about as profound an exhortation as any, because the virtues are muscles that need to be constantly exercised, if not they atrophy.
Yes, that's right. And we can always ask the question too that after these exchanges, do you feel any closer to Christ? Do you feel like you're a
Mm.
better person after reposting and giving your hot take uh, on Pope Leo's comment that I perhaps did not actually say on a plane? I'm seeing a lot of those right now. But are you feeling that you are a better person because of this? And the answer in so many cases is no, because you're not actually contributing anything to your own spiritual betterment. But then there's also the concern that as you're disseminating this information, you are also leading others into the vices, into rage and
Right.
envy.
Right. And therefore there's a kind of moral onus that's placed on us in even the way we use social media.
Hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And so I think again, the exercise of temperance, of prudence, and also of justice, of giving to God that which is due, but also giving to others what is due to them. So all of those work together in how we should be approaching social media, and understand that it is not your friend.
The amen. Now, to talk about a man who had tremendous virtue and prudence in working his way through the media, Fulton Sheen. I love this bit of news about Fulton Sheen giving a conference for 270,000 people in St. Louis.
Yeah, so we are very excited that obviously all of us who have been around for a while and want to talk about Fulton J. Sheen, that in September with his impending beatification, that this will be an opportunity to go back to it's very apropos to our conversation today, that how would Fulton J. Sheen have reacted to social media? First, I think we can agree that he absolutely would have been on social media.
Amen.
I think he would have used it and recognized it as a great instrument of evangelization. But imagine the turn of phrase that he could have used uh, in posts on X, for example. His threads would make for great reading, and his reels would also be great viewing. So it'll be an opportunity for us to reflect on his role in not just Catholic social communications, but in social communications writ large. And as we move toward this magnificent moment of beatification in September, on September 24th in St. Louis, this is a chance for us to really once again thank Fulton J. Sheen for his contributions to Catholic communications. But let's also remember he's not being beatified because he was a TV and radio star. He was being beatified and is going to be beatified because he demonstrated a life of lived heroic virtue.
Mhm.
And we have the validation of a miracle. So there is his holiness as a role model in our own lives, not just in how we go about communicating.
To talk about how the Holy Father, to go back to him, tell us briefly about his trip in Africa and the intended purpose of the mission and why we ought to pray for him.
Yeah, well, Pope Leo has been in Africa. This is day 4. He's in
Mm.
Cameroon today, which has suffered over the years from a lot of political unrest and problems. And he is speaking forthrightly about the need for dialogue between Christians and Muslims. He spent several very remarkable days in Algeria, including a visit to Annaba, which is now what used to be Hippo Regius, where St. Augustine was bishop for about 30 years and wrote some of his greatest works. So this was a personal journey for Pope Leo, given his own Augustinian roots. And you could see that in his face as he was visiting these sites. But then now he's shifting his focus to these other African countries. And he has days ahead of him. There's an 11-day visit to Algeria, Cameroon, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. Let's pay attention, especially to some of the masses that are coming up. We can anticipate, from what I'm hearing, that there could be as many as 1 million to 2 million people at some of these masses. And also one of the great rosary sites, I believe in Equatorial Guinea, could also attract millions of people. So let's keep the Holy Father in our prayers. It's grueling for anyone. The Holy Father looks great. He's 70. He seems to be in great health, but let's keep him safe and keep him in our prayers, because I think there are really important lessons that we can learn listening to his homilies, and the importance of healing the wounds of conflict, of finding ways to peace, to finding ways of living together. And I think that it's going to be an important message for Pope Leo, especially given the many challenges facing Africa today. And yet it is a land of such great hope, as we see. It's the fastest growing Catholic region.
Matthew, as usual, the time has just flown by.
It always does.
Tremendously grateful for your time with us. We didn't get to talk about Ottoman poetry, but we'll probably do it sometime in the future.
Next time, yes. I look forward to that.
My guest has been Dr. Matthew Bunson, Vice President and Editorial Director of EWTN News. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter.